Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Deal. I'm Jason Kelly alongside my partner, Alex Rodriguez. Today on the show, Joe Pompliano. He's the host of The Joe Pomp Show, founder of Huddle Up, and a founding partner of Pomp Investments. That's coming up later in the show. Alex, this is a guy we're excited to talk to.
I got to tell you, if 10 years ago you were to say, who's going to be the most influential media personality, media sports, entertainment, you could say it's going to be Joe Pomp because he's ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I'm excited to chop it up with him. But first, one of my favorite things to do is just talk to you about what you've been up to. You're at Aspen Ideas Festival. Greg Lemkow, who you and I both know very well, interviewed you and another guy we both know very well, David Rubenstein. He's actually going to be a guest on this show not too long from now. Tell me about what was going on. I mean, that's a tough assignment, man, going to Aspen in June.
I love going to Aspen. I wish I was there more than 12 hours, but I literally flew in, flew out. I had to get to New York. You know, I think David, he's the new greatest asset for Major League Baseball. I think he's the ideal owner. The Baltimore Orioles, that's where he's from. He's a giant in private equity. He's a giant in communications. For 73 years old, he's one of the most brilliant marketers there is. And I think he's just going to be an awesome, awesome asset to baseball.
I do wonder, as you guys talked about the state of baseball, what's he bringing to the table or what's on his mind in terms of what could happen with the game?
Well, if you think about everything he's done, going back 40 years when he started the great Carlyle Group, right? 20 years ago, he was the first guy to go across the pond and raise money. He's probably the best, most ferocious capital raiser over the last several decades. And I think he's just a progressive thinker. He's always ahead of the curve. He's a wonderful communicator. I think that's exactly what Major League Baseball needs. And he's just the perfect guy in the perfect time for it.
So it's interesting that you were talking to him this week because I spent this morning at Bloomberg Invest. This is an annual conference that we do. And not surprisingly to you or to me, we had a couple sessions on sports and sports as an asset class. I hosted a conversation with Mark Adonasio and Tom Werner. Mark Adonasio, owner of the Milwaukee Brewers. Tom Werner, of course, chairman of Fenway Sports Group, owners of the Boston Red Sox, Liverpool. They control NESN. They own the Pittsburgh Penguins as well. And it's funny hearing you talk about, David and baseball. One of the things that these guys were talking a lot about, because they've both been in Major League Baseball for a while, is how massive these rule changes have been for the business of baseball. I have to think you have seen that and knowing the game like you do, what do you make of where the game is at this moment?
I think it's brilliant. You wish you would have had these changes earlier, but better late than never. Give Rob Manfred a lot of credit. Give Tony Clark, the head of the union, a lot of credit for coming together in something that's not been, very easy to do for owners and players to come together with obviously their history going back to Marvin Miller and Don Fehr and the battles. So I think what this is, it should give him confidence that it's okay to be progressive and move the ball forward and move the chains. And what they've done with the game is made it shorter, better to watch, better to play, just a better product. Now, they need to do the same things in the business and entertainment side. And how do they move that to another lane and just keep making the game better and better and take some notes from the NFL, take some notes from the NBA and go from there.
Well, it's funny you say the thing about the NFL because one of the things Tom Werner pointed out is he's like, hey, listen, the NFL makes changes to the game literally every season. They get in, they do it. If something doesn't work, they stop doing it. He's like, baseball is just so these are my words, not his, but it sort of gets caught up in its own tradition and it just won't move forward. And, I texted you on Saturday because I was at the Yankee game with my family. It's beautiful night, unbelievable, a Saturday night in the Bronx with your family. Nothing's better than that. And honestly, it's a 2.5-hour game. It was really exciting. It was high scoring. We got on the train and went home. It was fantastic. I didn't get home at 2 a.m, which I feel like could easily have happened before these rule changes. So enough about me and my, get off of my lawn. But I will say one other thing I wanted to mention to you. So I spent a session with Josh Harris, owner of the 76ers and more recently owner of the Washington Commanders. I was pressing him a little bit about a couple things. One is valuations. I mean, holy smokes, man. He fully admitted that when he bought the Commanders a couple years ago for $6 billion, he gave up all credibility as a value investor. Probably true. I think 60 times revenue was what he paid. But If you look, and I brought this up with him, reports on Bloomberg and elsewhere saying that Jeffrey Lurie of the Philadelphia Eagles is selling a minority stake in his team, in his franchise. Valuation, $7.5 billion. That's a team in the same division as the Washington Commanders. So if you just do apples to apples, that's a 25% appreciation for Josh Harris in 2 years, if in fact those franchises are roughly valued the same, which I believe that they are. Stephen Ross, your neighbor and friend down there in Miami, talking about a $10 billion valuation for all the assets around the Dolphins. That, of course, includes F1 and the Miami Open. I did ask Josh, where he thought the ceiling was, and he said this growth has tracked, and he sees no reason it won't continue to track in terms of the valuation of franchises, whether it's NFL or others. It's a remarkable time to be watching this.
It really is. And our guy down here with Miami Dolphins, Steve Ross, word on the street was that, he turned down $10 billion enterprise from Ken Griffin. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but even those conversations to be written are pretty frightening. I will say this, Josh probably paid market or a little bit more for Commanders. You have to these days to have a general partner piece. But when you look at the price he paid for the Sixers and the Devils in the NHL, that 60 times, Jason, comes way down. So he's done pretty well. Nobody's going to feel sorry for Josh. He's a brilliant investor.
No, absolutely. And I'll give you the numbers because I looked them up ahead of this conversation. Roughly $220 million for the Sixers in 2011. Now, importantly, and I do think this is important, at the time, they were losing $30 to $50 million in EBITDA. Like, it was not a distress sale. It was a corporate carve-out from Comcast who was getting out of that business. But, he saw something there. He fully admitted that he did not anticipate that he would go into sports in the way that he and David Blitzer did. And obviously, they've expanded into the Premier League. And interestingly enough, one of their big projects individually, he and Blitz together, is in youth sports and specifically baseball. They're in business with Cal Ripken, as you know, Cal and Bill Ripken, in putting together this company called Unrivaled. I mean, it's unbelievable. I did want to also mention one of our favorite episodes that we've done, I think it's fair to say, was with Stephen A. Smith. You mentioned him earlier. He's about to get paid, my friend. We don't know exactly how much. Reports are out there that ESPN has put an offer for $18 million a year. That is less, I think, than what he is looking for. But I mean, he talked to us about how he was going to negotiate this deal. And so we'll see how it comes to fruition. This story is far from over. It sounds like there's going to be a lot of back and forth in the coming months, but $18 million, even I don't think he's going to settle for that. But even if he ended up there, what a remarkable story. And I obviously highly encourage people to listen to that episode of The Deal.
I think for our listeners, this is just a great inspirational story. When you think about it, he is the number one media personality probably on the planet. He's synonymous with ESPN. He's doing over 10 hours a week of content. He now has his podcast. He may want to be the next future Johnny Carson or maybe get into politics. And here's what's amazing for listeners is 10 years ago, this guy was met at a diner by one of the ESPN executives and said, "You are fired."
Yeah.
Then he went and got a job with Fox, didn't give up, got himself cleaned up, got smarter. He admitted to us, and his words were,
I was arrogant. And I was the worst kind of arrogant because I was stupid while I was arrogant. The biggest lesson I learned was the importance of mastering my business, not just from a negotiating standpoint, not just to empower myself as a talent, but as a man, learning to separate emotion from business.
But for anybody who's gone through a tough time, Stephen A. Smith, just a decade ago, did not have a job and put it together one piece at a time.
Amazing story. So check that out in the podcast feed. Coming up, Joe Pomp joins The Deal. We're excited to be joined by Joe Pompliano. He's the host of the sports podcast, The Joe Pomp Show, and he's also the founding partner of Pomp Investments. They've invested in more than 100 early-stage companies. Most notably, he's the founder of Huddle Up. That's a daily newsletter breaking down his personal opinion on the money and business behind sports. Welcome, Joe.
I love that. I've been a big fan of your guys' show, too, for a while. It's really become a great resource in sports business. So thank you guys for doing this because this is awesome.
Joe, getting to know you a little bit, what I thought was really interesting about kind of studying your progression and your growth in the media and, your letters are so popular, coming from JP Morgan, being an analyst, I think you bring the rigorous research and work ethic, you understand numbers, and you love sports. And like that trifecta makes you, I believe, so effective. And on top of that, you're a great communicator. Did you always know you were a talented communicator? Because usually people with math are not great communicators and vice versa, but you got both.
No, I still don't really think of myself as a great communicator, especially not a writer. I don't have a writing background. So when I write the newsletter, it's almost kind of like a journal to some degree. I write in a very casual setting. I try not to be or pretend to be smarter than I am. And I think people have adapted to that and appreciate it. And what I noticed is that specifically in sports business, you guys know this, there's publications that do a really good job, Bloomberg, everyone else, right? And from an individual perspective, there wasn't really a ton of people who were doing it quite well. So I thought there was an opportunity to really just lean into that and be myself and say, hey, I don't know all the answers, but these are things that I'm really interested in. And I'm willing to put in the work to kind of learn alongside you guys. And what I found is that people appreciate that, whether it's on the podcast or newsletter or social media. It's just like anything else, right? You try something, it doesn't work. You move on to the next. That works. Okay, let's go do more of that. And really, that's how I've built all the stuff on the media side.
I'm taken back, Alex, to the conversation we had with your other partner, Mark Laurie, and his decision to like ditch Wall Street and like go all in on being an entrepreneur.
I just need to do this because I'm like all in kind of guy.
Yeah.
Like I was just doing banking so intensely, I couldn't like focus. So he said, "You're serious?" I said, "Yeah."
There are echoes of that here, Joe. Like, I mean, what was that moment like where you went to JP Morgan and you're like, hey, this has been great, but I'm out and I'm going to go like do my own thing and create all this. And by the way, I'm going to do it in sports. Like this is every person's dream in some ways. But what did it feel like to you at the moment?
It was scary. But you know what's funny, Jason, is they legitimately laughed. My boss at the time was global head of fixed income. So you have to imagine he's got a million different things going on. And this obviously wasn't at the top of his priority list. An associate at the time coming to him and saying, hey, I think I'm going to leave, right? And he said, you're going to be a writer? And I'm like, well, kind of, but not really, right? There's a bunch of other stuff that goes into it. You know, he didn't really get it. I think today a lot of them have reached out and understand it more. But it's scary. It's just like anything else. I was fortunate. I always tell this story because I really appreciated it at the time, and I certainly appreciate it now, given everything that's happened. There's a company called Athletic Brewing. Anyone who's ever heard of them knows they're a non-alcoholic beer company. And the founder of the company came to me at the time. I had met him through a mutual friend, and he essentially said, hey, look, I'll sponsor everything you're going to do for 6 months. You're probably going to get a better deal for the first few months, given how things are growing today. I might get a better deal at the end of that 6 months. So he gave me enough leeway to just say, hey, look, I have security for the next 6 months. There's people that do this with much less security. And that's when everything really started to accelerate. So like I owed a great debt of gratitude to them for making that happen. But it's scary, right? It's like anything else where people just need to kind of have confidence in themselves and have belief that internally that they can make it happen.
So, Joe, you've been a great forecaster. I mean, probably 9 out of 10 people that decide to do what you do, or you did, would probably fail, right? You were obviously in the right side of history there. When you think about the landscape of media today and how much is changing with OTT and everything else, and the way you think about your newsletter, your podcast, and also your investing arm, where do you see your business 1, 3, 5 years from now?
Well, I think there's a few different routes. The concern with some of that stuff, right, is like, what is the end goal? What are you trying to create? Are you trying to build something over the next 3 to 5 years that you can sell? Are you trying to use that for something else? And me specifically, what I've always used the media as is leverage to do other things, right? We make money, it's profitable, it's a good business. But really what I want to do is use it as leverage for something that I think can be more profitable, which is the investing side. And what I mean by that, right, is like when I go to a business, I can basically get into any deal that I want right now on the sports side because they know that I'm going to help them on the media side when it comes to announcements, product features, or anything else related to that. And it makes a real meaningful difference in their business, which is tangible value that not every investor can say, right? And look, I'm investing personal money, so it's not, multi-million-dollar checks in most cases. And I think that has been really helpful for a lot of founders that I've worked with and something that I've been really keen on keeping distant from building this into something that maybe I'm not as happy as I am today.
I think I speak for Alex and myself. We love people's processes. How do you pick your stories? What's your process like when you identify something? And then how do you go about sort of digging deep into it?
So one of the things that I'm very cognizant of is that media has been democratized completely at this point, right? If you think about media today, all you really need is an iPhone. Like you can create a TikTok account tomorrow. You can make a video on something that you're knowledgeable about or care, And they're going to push that video to a million other people if it's good. What are you offering that's different? Obviously, you're going to pick stories that have a wider audience or a total addressable market that's bigger than other things. That's kind of like the first level of everything. But then how are you explaining those stories? And I think one thing that I've really found success in is storytelling. When it comes down to it, everything is storytelling, right? How are you conveying the messaging? Communication is everything. You can say the exact same story in two different ways, and one is going to hit with people way more than the other just based on how you communicate that. And then it's just communicating it in a way that is authentic and compelling to an audience through typical narratives. And what I found is that doing that on different mediums, i.e. the newsletter is one audience, social media is a completely different audience, the podcast sometimes is a different audience too. And by being in multiple different places at once, you're able to reach a way wider audience than you maybe would be otherwise.
Can you share maybe one or two storytelling techniques that actually has made you better as you hone your craft?
So I think at the simplest form, you need a hook, right? You need to be able to hook people into the content within the first, if it's a video, I mean, you literally have 5 seconds, right? That's how short attention spans are today. When it comes to writing, you have a little bit longer, maybe, the first paragraph or two to really be able to get someone interested. And then from there, it's explaining kind of where the conflict is in the story, right? Everyone loves having a little bit of conflict and someone overcoming that. You want to be a little bit contrary to kind of the opinions out there sometimes, depending on what the story is. But ultimately, I really do think that it just comes back to like an innate interest in some of these topics. People can tell if you're talking about something that you don't care about. I get asked all the time, right? Write about cricket. I'm like, I don't watch cricket, right? Like cricket's a massive sport. Anytime I've ever tweeted about cricket in the past, it goes viral because there's hundreds of millions, billions of people that care about cricket. But I don't watch cricket. I don't know enough about cricket, and I don't care enough about cricket to be able to write about it or talk about it on a consistent basis. And that's like the perfect example of me of what you should be talking about is things that you care about. So like Alex, if you wanted to go do something, I've seen your videos, right? You post some of these videos that are short form, sometimes talking about your playing days or how to grip a bat or the grip on a baseball or your glove and things like that. And those always overperform because one, you have the expertise to be able to talk about it, but two, people can tell that you really care about that. And for me, those are the things that perform really well too.
Yeah, one of my favorite things, Joe, is some of the stuff you've done about Formula One, which I really am interested in. And I think one of the trickiest things about that subject, and Alex and I have talked about this a little bit, is, getting that broader audience interested in it. Was that one that you had a relationship with as a fan, or was it something that you just identified and wanted to figure out? Like, it's just an example that sort of springs to my mind.
Yeah, so I've watched Formula One for a while, but the reason why I've gone so much more into it is because my wife became much more interested in it. And now it's become something that we can do together. We talk about, she actually finds a lot more information about it than I do at first, which has become really fun. But the thing about Formula One is that, and actually just content in general, is if you read the newsletter, there's 125,000 subscribers on the newsletter. And for sports business, that's relatively large because sports business is sort of such a niche topic, right?
Yes.
And the reason I've been very thoughtful about that is I want to cast a wide enough net to where I can have subscribers all over the world. There's like 180 countries that are represented on the newsletter today, right? So it's very wide net that has been cast. But then you want to go deep enough to a point where still the executives and commissioners from all the major sports leagues in the US still care about the work and are reading it, right? So there's a really big quality there. And that's why when you read it, you'll understand that I don't ever go way too deep down the rabbit hole and talk about terms that people can't understand. It's breaking it down in the simplest terms in the shortest, concise amount that you can. And Formula One's a great sport for that because while it's incredibly complex, you're essentially teaching it to an entirely new audience here in the United States who hasn't followed it. And now it's grown and there's a great story there with Liberty Media and the numbers and everything associated with that. But you're explaining it and you're talking about it and you're associating it with a business that they know in Liberty Media here. So Formula One's been a great additive sport to everything that I've done over the years. But again, it goes back to everything that I said previously about just a sport that I've watched and I've loved over the years too.
Alex and I, we have a constant text back and forth of like stuff we're looking at. We don't need you to give away any IP and like future newsletters and things like that. But like, what are you watching out there right now? Like, what's capturing your attention at the moment?
I'm an open book. I think specifically if we talk about the US, there's a few things. The NFL is really interesting to me right now. I think at some point in the near future, they're going to be approving the private equity funds to come in and buy the minority stakes like we've seen in the NBA and other leagues like that. I think that's going to be incredibly helpful for a lot of the owners who either want to take money off the table or a lot of investors that just want to put and park money in an asset that is known to appreciate and is going to be illiquid. And Obviously, there's a lot of investment funds that are going to be spun up and want to do that too. So that's one thing with the NFL. And then I think the NFL is going to be making a lot more money in the future. If you think about the NBA today, right, they're going to go out and sign these $75 billion media contracts. The NFL has $110 billion media contracts, but they can opt out of those in the next 5 years. I think they're probably going to do that given what's happening in the media space today. Their numbers have appreciated a lot. The thing that is really interesting about the NFL is that Roger Goodell has done a really good job, I think, of democratizing who gets the game. So they brought in a bunch of different partners without losing the ability to find those games. So he's kind of balanced that line between broadcast, cable, and streaming. But more importantly, he's created a bunch of premium inventory of these like one-off games. So Christmas Day is the most obvious example, but Black Friday, they have these international games now. The first week of the season, there's going to be an international game. And what I think they're going to do is they're going to go to the networks and say, hey, not only is our numbers up and we want to make more money, but now we have all these individual games that we can sell as one-off, instances too. And it wouldn't surprise me if they make significantly more than the contracts they've made over the last few years. So on the NFL side, that's something that I'm particularly interested in and I think is going to be a big storyline over the next decade.
Jason and I were just talking before you jumped on about baseball and some of the challenges and then some of the great things they've done with the rules changed and all the other things they've done. You've talked a little bit about the NFL and what a powerhouse that is, a little bit about the $75 billion with the NBA. If you were commissioner for one day, what are 2 or 3 things you would do to make the game more popular and grow more?
In baseball?
Yes, baseball.
So baseball, I think a lot of fans are frustrated with the blackout rules. That's something that's a difficult challenge. And if it would have been easy, it would have been solved a long time ago. So I think that's something that continues to kind of fester with fans. But I think the rule changes were overwhelmingly positive. Look, the attention span of people has changed a lot over the last couple of decades. And that's something that baseball has to deal with because of the structure of the game. At the end of the day, though, people love going to baseball games. The attendance numbers are fantastic. And I think the things that are really going to improve that stuff over time is just creating more narratives around the game. If you think about what is most powerful today, it's storylines that resonate with people online. So the NFL does a great job showing the personality of players, like Taylor Swift thing. People got tired of it at the end of the day, but the NFL pushed it so much because they knew it was attracting people to the game. And you can see the Super Bowl viewership numbers. The numbers were up tremendously, specifically with women and younger women. And that's very important for advertisers and sponsorship revenue. So Major League Baseball can do a better job, I think, with some of that stuff of getting their stars in front of people more. But it takes 2 to tango, right? And the stars of today's baseball game need to want to do that and want to build up their profiles. And I think that's a position that Major League Baseball can aspire to get to.
Yeah, Jason just went to the game with his family on a couple of days ago. He was texting me, beautiful picture. He had great seats. But one of the things quickly that I believe is a low-hanging fruit for Major League Baseball is the word access. You talked about F1. You see Hard Knocks in NFL, inside the NBA. Like, I would have loved for Jason, 2.5-hour game. He's on the train. But if he wanted to, with his family, see whatever Aaron Judge is doing for the next hour after the game, whether that's going in the batting cage, icing his knees, like, we need to open up the floodgates and take a page from the other sports. And the more access, the better. And that's the one thing where baseball has the ultimate competitive advantage because they have unlimited content. And they can be much better partners to partners in media by offering all these, miking everyone, doing all the things that, we as fans like.
So why aren't they doing that, Alex?
There's still this embedded fight among owners and players. And you wish that for the next century, they should be thinking about just grow the pie. And owners would do better. Players would do better. And if you do that, bring the glory days back to Major League Baseball.
Joe, that sort of builds on exactly or references exactly what you were saying about the NBA. The NBA has done that brilliantly, right? In terms of like having the owners and the league and the players really come together around these common interests. I mean, there's a business proposition there that is much cleaner and more successful in a lot of ways.
I totally agree. And I actually think the reason why Drive to Survive was so successful for Formula One, right?
Yeah.
If you think about what Formula One used to be before Liberty Media bought them, there's this famous story of they used to send cease and desist letters to Lewis Hamilton for posting pictures from the paddock, right? He would take a photo of himself or something in the paddock and he would post it on Snapchat at the time because that was what he was using. And he used to get cease and desist letters from the business side of things, just saying, hey, you can't do this. Our TV holders, rights holders are going to get mad that you're sharing content that they own, right? And I think what Formula One realized through Liberty Media was, no, we have to build up the storylines and create stars out of these people. And now these drivers, I mean, even in the United States, they can't go anywhere without being treated like movie stars, right? They get swarmed because now people care about them. And it's the same thing in the NBA. And I think that's something that Major League Baseball, through Alex's point, can strive to get to.
Yeah, and Jace, just because I'm so passionate about this, Joe's got me going a little bit here. But look, I mean, I am an enormous fan of baseball, right? Like the last 30 years has been my life. And I challenge both of you to find 4 biggest stars in any sport bigger than Ohtani, Judge, Soto, and Mookie Betts. But yet, we know nothing about them. It's like Cary Grant back in the 50s or 60s. Like, you know the star, but you don't know anything about him. And that used to be cool then. But today, the fans need more. They demand more. But unless we take the helmet off and reveal who these players are, it's hard for the consumer or for us to ask the consumer to fall in love with these great players.
Joe, we're going to move to the lightning round in 1 second, but I got to ask you, because Alex and I talked about it at the top of the show before you came on. You know, Stephen A is negotiating his new deal, you know, the McAfee effect. Like, as someone who is both in the media and deeply interested in sports and deeply interested in that nexus of sports media, I mean, McAfee obviously has a different business model in terms of licensing to ESPN. Stephen A may end up doing that. Like, what's the end game here in your estimation?
Yeah, I actually wrote about this the other day, and it was kicked off by John Oren at Puck, said that he reported that Stephen A was asking for $25 million a year on his new deal, and ESPN was at 18 at their initial offer, and kind of where would that divide close? And my opinion at the time, which is seems to be proven true now through past reporting, is that Stephen A is going to kind of structure this deal in a more unique way than he has in the past, right? His production company does a lot of work with First Take already. My guess is he tries to spin it out like McAfee does with his show and license that content back to ESPN. He gets a little bit more profit by doing the production company side of things too. He'll probably have some appearance fees for other Disney stuff. The difficult part for me, right, is that Stephen A. Smith isn't tied to live rights. So you can make a case that Joe Buck and Troy Aikman, what they're paid, is fine. It's fair. It's totally acceptable because of how much ESPN is investing in Monday Night Football and the return that they're going to get from advertisers. I mean, their salaries are paid back in the first week or two through commercials alone, not even counting affiliate fees or anything else. So that money totally makes sense. The problem with Stephen A is as we transition to a world that is closer to streaming and less linear and kind of broadcast television, that salary becomes harder to justify because of that lack of live rights. Now, look, his programming, he's a superstar, he's a celebrity at this point. It's adjacent to that, and it certainly points people towards everything. So I think he'll end up getting a number that's over $20 million a year. It's going to be a huge deal, and he's going to be happy with it. Right. They're going to structure it like a licensing deal, similar to McAfee, similar to maybe what Peyton Manning is doing with Omaha, and they're going to find a way to pay him what he wants. One of the things, too, with ESPN is they've made a very concentrated effort as they transition to streaming to pay up for premium products, right? So the college football playoff was a good example of this. They came in over the top, paid more than anyone else, and they wanted that. They're doing this with a bunch of other properties, the NBA, of course, and other properties like that, because they know that the premium properties are what everyone wants. That's what people are going to tune into, and that's why people are going to sign up for the subscription services. And I would put Stephen A in that bucket. Obviously, he's not as important as the rights, but I think from a personality standpoint, he's super important, and they'll find a way to get the deal done.
Yeah, I mean, his ratings for First Take have delivered. I mean, in a world where everybody's viewership is going down, his is going up. So clearly doing something right. Okay, let's get to the rapid fire lightning round. We're going to throw a bunch of stuff at you, Joe. Keep it tight. What's the best piece of advice you've received on deal making or business?
Trust your gut and always bet on people rather than ideas.
Favorite deal you've covered in your newsletter this year?
That's a good one. Let's go with Stephen A. I think that's going to be a good storyline for the next few months.
What's the best deal you've worked on?
I like being kind of involved on the ground floor of some of this stuff. So I'm an investor in the PLL, the Premier Lacrosse League, and I think that's a really interesting business because they're essentially trying to create a new sports league from the ground up, and that kind of stuff excites me. It may not be as flashy as some of the other ones, but it's certainly a fun project to be involved in.
We're going to have Paul Rabel coming up on the deal later this year.
Let's go.
Joe, I was a Jay-Z guy for my walk-off song. I want to know, what's your walk-up song? Were you for a big meeting or for a big negotiation?
See, you guys will be surprised. I like country. I grew up in North Carolina, so you play anything country, I'll be there.
All All right, final question. What's the biggest business lesson you've learned?
Always bet on yourself. I think if there's anything that I've learned over the years is that if you put in the work and you bet on yourself, good things will happen.
Joe Pompliano, he's the host of the Joe Pomp Show, founder of Huddle Up, founding partner of Pomp Investments. So fun to mix it up with you. Really, really fun. And looking forward, as always, to your next newsletter, your next pod, your next tweet, and your next deal. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Joe.
The Deal is hosted by Alex Rodriguez and me, Jason Kelly. This episode was made by Victor Aveas, Stacey Wong, Anna Mazarakis, and Lizzie Phillip. Our theme music was made by Blake Maples. Brendan Francis Noonan is our executive producer. Sage Bauman is the head of Bloomberg Podcasts. Additional support from Kelly LaFerriere, Ashley Honig, Rachel Scaramuzzino, and Elena Sausangelis. If you have a minute, subscribe, rate, and review our show. It'll help other listeners find us. Thanks so much for listening. See you next time.